Typesetting today refers to the composition of text, whether through arranging type through physical or digital means. In the past, typesetting referred to the action of composing words from the individual pieces of type. But as you doubtless have experienced yourself through the computer, text can now be composed digitally. In this section, I am going to discuss the different typesetting methods. The simplest, though not necessarily the easiest way of setting type is hand lettering and calligraphy. As you've seen in the previous module, monks copied the Bible by hand. But hand lettering type isn't confined to medieval times. Books have been completely handwritten. Interestingly enough, the book How Typography Works is largely written by hand. This book is called The Zen of Seeing and features text that has been completely handwritten by the author. Children's books and art books have also featured handwritten text. Calligraphy and handmade type can be mixed with other elements and other typesetting processes for interesting results. And for the longest time, comic books have been exclusively hand-rendered with ink, a process that some continue to do to this day. If you can handwrite it, you can also type it. Although largely obsolete, strike-on setting refers to the kind of typesetting done through the striking of keys onto a surface, such as a typewriter. Here is an example of a typeset quality typewriter, the IBM Selectric, introduced in the 1960s. This typewriter uses a golf ball-like printhead that had 88 characters. The Selectric even used interchangeable typefaces. Hot metal or hot type is something you've already encountered. The term takes its name from the fact that type is cast from molten lead. And this method of setting type has remained virtually unchanged from Gutenberg's time until the late 1800s. Hot metal, though, is no longer used in large print runs. The New York Times stopped using this typesetting system in 1978. But hot metal is still used today for small print runs, such as in invites, posters, or limited edition books. Hot type can be set in two ways. One is by hand, and the other uses the aid of a machine such as the Linotype and the Monotype. More on this later. For hand setting metal type, the compositor takes individual metal sorts and spaces from a type case and places them one by one into a composing stick that has been adjusted to the correct measure. Capital letters are taken from the uppercase compartments and the small letters from the lowercase compartments. When the composing stick is full, the setting is transferred to a galley on an imposing table. Imposition is a term in printing which refers to the layouting of pages such that they appear in the correct order once printed. A galley is a long steel tray holding a column of type. When the galley is full, a proof is taken on a hand-operated proofing press. A galley proof is a piece of paper that gives the designer an opportunity to see if the typesetting is correct, so that any mistakes can be picked up and corrected by the proofreader, the designer, or the copy editor. This is where you get the term proofread. If everything is good to go, the setting is taken from the galley and placed into a page-sized frame called the chase. A chase is a heavy steel frame used to hold type in a letterpress. As seen here, the chase comes in different page sizes. Most of the space in the chase not occupied with type is filled with blocks of wood called furniture. The type and furniture are locked in place by quoins. A quoin is an adjustable metal wedge used to tighten and lock the type and furniture in the chase. When the chase is locked up with type, furniture, and quoins, it's called a forme. Here is an example of a letterpress poster done by a print shop called The Hat Show. Note how the printing is done flat, directly from the form. Here is another example of a typographic poster done in letterpress. Note how the designers shaped the arrangement of the form to create the composition. For small print runs, the printing is made directly from the form. But when the print run is substantially large, such as newspapers and magazines, printers create something called a stereotype. A stereotype is a curved lead plate that's attached to the printing rollers of a rotary press. The plate is cast using a papier-mâché mold called a flong. Once the stereotype has been made, the type inside the form is cleaned and returned to their cases for further use.
Bakit sila gumagamit ng stereotype? Well, ginagamit yung stereotype dahil, for one thing, it's lighter and durable than using yung form na full of type. Pero pinakamahalaga dito, kasi kung isipin nyo, hindi ganun kadami yung sorts na nasa isang imprenta. Talagang darating ang panahon, medyo maubusan ng mga letra, may tendency maubusan ng mga letra dahil may mga iba-ibang jobs na kinukuha. And mahal tong mga pieces of type na to. So, yung stereotype ginagamit para ma-lock in na yung layout nung page. Tapos pag na-lock in na yung layout ng page, yung iba't ibang sorts na ginamit to do that page can now be distributed to other jobs. Tapos yung locked in na layout na yun na yung stereotype, yun na yung gagamitin to reprint multiple pages. So yun yung dahilan kung bakit gumagamit sila ng stereotype. So obviously, composing type by hand is very time consuming, mas lalo na pag large print runs. Kailangan makahanap ng way para ma-automate yung casting ng type. So para mas madagdagan yung efficiency at yung bilis ng pagprinting. And dito pumasok yung invention ng Linotype.
The Linotype machine was invented by Ottmar Mergenthaler in 1886 to automate typecasting. The machine gets its name from the fact that it casts whole lines of type. These lines of type are called slugs and are set in one operation. A compositor keys in the text, and as it's typed, molds of the letters to be cast fall into place. Lead pours into the assembly and out comes a slug of type. As you can see, the automation happens only with the typecasting. But once the slugs have been generated, the compositor still has to assemble the lines of type by hand into a form. The Linotype was once called the eighth wonder of the world and was heavily used around the world for setting solid blocks of type. Whereas before, type had to be set by hand, letter by letter, the Linotype automated typesetting by casting entire lines in one go, producing printable type 6 times as fast as the traditional manual method. The Monotype machine, on the other hand, was developed by Tolbert Lanston in 1887 and sets type in individual sorts or characters as opposed to the Linotype's single lines of type. The advantage of the Monotype machine over the Linotype was that corrections could be made using precast sorts. It was also more versatile than the Linotype and suited to complicated copy, such as mathematical equations and chemical formulas. But it was also slower and more expensive to operate than the Linotype. so it was rarely used for setting solid text copy. The Monotype, unlike the Linotype, uses a two-stage process, a keyboard operation and a casting operation. The compositor sits at the keyboard and inputs the text, which is coded onto a perforated roll of paper. The roll of paper is inserted into a typecasting machine and tells the machine which individual sorts were to be casted. Nowadays, the Linotype and the Monotype are obsolete, so there are no more flongs or stereotypes being used, because there are no more large-scale letterpress jobs being done today. It's largely obsolete, but letterpress still exists, and hand setting still survives and is still being used whenever beautiful typography is demanded, for high-quality limited edition publications, posters, invitations. Hand setting type still survives. The term cold type was coined because these kinds of typesetting methods did not involve metal type. Instead, the start of the cold type era came about when typesetting used light and the photographic process instead of metal. This leads us to the method that made Linotype and Monotype obsolete, and that is photo typesetting. Photo typesetting was based on the principle of a stroboscope, wherein if you had a camera that was fast enough, you could take a photo of a moving object as if it was standing still. So a method was developed wherein each letter of type, each glyph, was made into a negative film. These negatives were either in discs or strips, but the basic principle is that these letters moved very quickly based on a timing system. And as the letters moved, a xenon flash lamp was projected into the moving letters. But they were photographed as if they were standing still. The light would go through a lens and you could make it bigger or smaller. Photo typesetting provided the designer with many advantages over hot metal. Whereas before a typesetter had to physically manipulate metal type, letters could now be set closer together so that they could be touching and even overlapping. It was also possible through the use of mirrors and prisms to distort type. Oblique letters could be created from Roman type, and headlines could be condensed and expanded to fit a given width. Furthermore, type produced through photo typesetting was sharper than those made in hot metal setting. In later photo typesetting systems, the fonts were stored digitally and reconstructed using cathode ray tubes, and then down the line, lasers were even used. Another example of a cold type setting is the use of rub-down letter transfers. The most famous of these was made by a company called Letraset. These vinyl letters were transferred one by one onto a paper or board through burnishing. Another kind of cold type is cutting and pasting existing type samples, as in the punk blackmail style designs of album covers by Jamie Reed in the late 1970s. A photo typesetting machine may have looked like a computer, but typesetting was all it could do. A computer system does so much more. Images, designs, and text can be started, generated, and finished in the computer. The computer has now become an extension of our thought. It's almost as instantaneous as using a pencil. Nowadays, the computer has been universally adopted by both printing and design industries. With a computer system, we have access to a dizzying amount of typefaces. The computer can scale, distort, embolden, outline, and do all sorts of things to existing typefaces. And any user with enough access to tutorials and software can create new typefaces on their own. Today, the graphic designer has largely taken on the role of typesetter and compositor. Typesetting and formatting for professional-grade printing is done through computer applications that possess operations that were once done by hand. It's important as a designer to use the correct applications for their intended purpose so as to avoid problems in printing, because not all applications can handle the necessary files. So for typesetting and formatting, we have to use vector-based and page layouting programs. These programs have the ability to handle multiple file formats and bring together images, typography, and illustrations for a high-quality, high-resolution output. To briefly explain, vector-based programs use paths to create graphics. What that means is the graphics can be scaled without degrading their quality, which is essential if you want to produce clean, crisp typography. Some vector-based programs include Adobe Illustrator, CorelDRAW, Affinity Designer, and Inkscape. Page layout programs include Adobe InDesign, Quark Express, and Affinity Publisher. In contrast, programs such as Photoshop are raster-based programs. Images created in Photoshop are composed of pixels and are resolution-based. If you compare these two letters created in Photoshop and Illustrator, you'll note that at a certain level, the Photoshop-generated letter becomes pixelized, while the letter done in Illustrator retains its crisp, sharp edge. Some raster programs include Adobe Photoshop, Corel Paint, and Affinity Photo. Please remember, do not use these programs for typesetting long copy. Just don't. We'll discuss this more in a later lesson.
Okay, let's talk about fonts. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with fonts. And some fonts come pre-installed in your computer's operating system. May mga fonts na kailangan mong bilhin, and may mga fonts na libre sa internet. And hindi lahat ng typefaces, okay? Hindi lahat ng typefaces pare-pareho. May mga gandang typefaces kung saan yung designer talagang pinlano niya yung metrics ng mga letra, kung paano magtutugma. Meron naman na hindi. Okay? At meron din mga typefaces talagang galit na galit yung mga tao, which is Comic Sans, Papyrus. So, ang choices mo, either you're gagamitin mo yung pre-installed fonts mo sa iyong computer, or magda-download ka ng fonts from other sites. Marami nagpo-provide ng mga libreng fonts. Isa na dito yung Google Fonts, meron din yung Font Squirrel, thefonts.com. At kung gusto mo pang mas mapadami pa yung fonts na pwede mong gamitin, kailangan mong bumili. I've bought fonts before. May site called mightydeals.com. Nagbebenta sila ng fonts. Regularly nagdi-discount sila ng fonts na hindi masyadong hindi ganun kamahal, medyo reasonable. Pero may mga fonts talaga na umaabot ng over $100. And for example, yung lahat ng fonts na ginagamit ng sa phone systems nyo, yung mga kumpanya na yan, they license these fonts. So they pay these font foundries for the use of their fonts. Like other things we've been doing, fonts are intellectual property. So meron mga nagme-may-ari niyan, at kailangan mong bilhin. Pero as you know, pwede ka rin bumili ng pirata. Kailangan nga lang mag-ingat kasi daw may mga ibang fonts na dahil pirata sila, hindi maganda yung pagkakagawa dahil parang reproduction lang sila. Meron naman may mga embedded viruses, I don't know. So yun lang, mag-ingat lang kayo sa paggamit ng mga ganon. Pero yun yung reality ng ating mundo. Basic things about fonts. Unang-una, kung gusto mong ipa-view sa ibang tao yung layout mo at ipa-edit yung layout mo, kailangan kung anong font ang ginamit mo sa layout, nandun din sa kabilang system. So, kailangan naka-install din yung font na yun sa kabilang system. So, yun yung pinaka-basic thing. So, having said that, I'd like to talk about the three regular file formats ng fonts na meron ngayon.
There are three regular file formats: PostScript Type 1, TrueType, and OpenType. PostScript Type 1 was developed for desktop computer systems in the 1980s by Adobe. Type 1 fonts are output using the PostScript programming language, rated for generating high-resolution images on paper or film. A Type 1 font consists of two files, a screen font and a printer font. You had to install both files in order to fully use these fonts. TrueType was a later font format. It was created by Apple and Microsoft for use with their operating systems. OpenType is a format developed by Adobe and works on multiple platforms. Each file supports up to 65,000 characters, allowing multiple styles and character variations to be contained in a single font file. In a true type or type 1 font, small capitals, alternate ligatures, and other special characters must be contained in a separate font file. In an open type font, they're part of the main font. These expanded character sets can also include accented letters and other special glyphs needed for typesetting in a variety of languages. OpenType fonts with expanded character sets are commonly labeled Pro. OpenType fonts also automatically adjust the position of hyphens, brackets, and parentheses for letters set in all capitals. While preparing this lecture, I just remembered that I've largely forgotten. There was a time when Mac fonts were not compatible with Windows fonts and vice versa. Before you could, if you were on a Mac system, you had to convert Windows fonts, and it was a tedious process. And nowadays, hindi na ganun ngayon. I think starting 1999 or 2000, they made compatibility really seamless between Windows and Mac. So that's one tidbit for you. Okay, if you've seen, you've gotten a glimpse of the past. You've seen letterpress. You've seen how printers were hand setting type, and you've seen the difficulties of doing that, the craft involved, and obviously you know that using computer systems is very advantageous. It makes things faster, and what you see is what you get. Kung ano yung naisip mo, and it's a matter of just inputting it sa computer, walang intermediary. So mas madali, mas nakikita mo kaagad yung results. That's what they call WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. But there are disadvantages to using computer systems. Typesetting used to be a very separate discipline from a designer. As a designer, you're tasked to come up with the concept, the aesthetics. But a skilled typesetter can spot errors in copy and formatting. And because of computer systems, the designer is in charge of everything, and that can be a good and bad thing, depending on your level of training. Personally, I've never worked with a skilled typesetter, and if you've looked at the hundreds of Filipino books currently on the market today, madami din dyan hindi. Marami dyan hindi sinusunod yung mga rules of typography, like optimum line lengths, watching out for rivers, widows, and orphans, all these things. And yun ang problem, because dahil designer and typographer have largely been merged, mas lalo sa Pilipinas, yung craft, something is lost. The craft of proper setting of type. So that's just one of the problems of it, one of the disadvantages. So what does that mean? There is more responsibility for us as designers to educate ourselves on proper typography. And as designers, I really think you should read. I really think you should expose yourself a lot to text, nilang visuals. And para maramdaman yung rhythms of reading and what it means, what it takes to set type or to craft a layout that is legible, readable, and at the same time attractive to the reader. And one of the dangers din nga of being designer and typographer at the same time is the unimaginative use of defaults. There are defaults in your software, and it's so easy to just go with the default. So that's a thing to look out for. There are reasons for these defaults, and you have to educate yourself why those are and when you can alter them and deviate from them. So yun lang, yun yung mga disadvantages with these computer systems. So in conclusion, we've gone from Gutenberg, we've seen how hot metal is used to print type, and the letterpress printing method was used to do that, and hot type was supplanted with cold type, which led to photo typesetting. From metal, you had light and the use of film to reprint or reproduce text, and that the development does not stop there. From film, we have something called an image setter. So from photo typesetting, we're going to go to image setting, and we'll discuss more of that in our next lecture. And after text, because print production is about reproducing images and text, after text, our next lecture will be about images. So see you again then.